Here is an experiment that nobody is allowed to run. Take several thousand newborn babies. Split them into two groups at random. Feed one group a diet high in sugar for the first 2 years of life. Feed the other group very little. Then wait 70 years and count who gets cancer. No ethics committee on earth would approve that study. No parent would consent to it, and quite right too. And nobody has 70 years of patience. And so the question just sits there, unanswered. Does what you eat before your second birthday still matter 70 years later? In August 2026, a team of researchers published an answer. They did not run the experiment. They found one that had already been run, by accident, on an entire country, Britain, 1953. The war had been over for 8 years, and the country was still on rations. Rationing had begun in 1940, and it outlasted the war by nearly a decade. On the 8th of January 1940, 3 things were rationed first: bacon, butter, and sugar. Sugar was in that first group for a simple reason. Before the war, Britain imported about 70% of it. An island that imports most of its calories has a very specific wartime problem, and the Atlantic was full of submarines. Meat, butter, cheese, eggs, tea, and sugar, all of it controlled. All of it counted. Every household had a book of coupons, and every purchase was written down. Each person was registered with a particular shop. You could not simply take your custom elsewhere, and the rules were not uniform. They bent, deliberately, around the very young. Children under 2 were given cod liver oil and bottled orange juice, free. Children under 5 and expectant mothers got subsidized milk and priority when milk was short. Britain was, in effect, running a national infant nutrition policy and writing down what it did. Across the population, consumption of fat and sugar fell, while milk and fiber went up. By some measures, the wartime diet was the healthiest the country has ever eaten. Nobody enjoyed it. Sugar was among the very last things to come off the list. Sugar for a birthday cake was often simply unavailable. Couples marrying in those years sometimes hired a wedding cake made of cardboard and plaster, with a small real cake hidden inside it. There had already been one attempt to relax the rules on sweets, and it had gone badly. In April 1949, sweets came off ration. There was a rush on the sweet shops. Within 4 months, the government had to put them back on. They stayed rationed until 1953. Sweets and chocolate finally came off for good in February of that year. Then, in September 1953, sugar rationing ended, and consumption nearly doubled. Not gradually, not over a generation. Almost immediately, meat followed in July 1954, and with it, 14 years of food rationing ended, which means something quietly strange happened to the children born around that date. A child born in 1951 spent almost all of its infancy under rationing. A child born in 1955 spent almost none of it. Same country, same food culture, same health service, same weather, same houses, same schools. Children born a few months apart, on either side of a line drawn by policy, received measurably different amounts of sugar, and they received it at the one moment when it might matter most. That is what researchers call a natural experiment. Nobody designed it, nobody consented to it. History simply ran it and left the results lying around for 70 years. The window that matters here has a name, the first 1,000 days. From conception to a child's second birthday. It is a short window. It is also not an arbitrary one. In that time, organs are still being built. Metabolism is being configured. The immune system is still working out what it is supposed to attack and what it is supposed to leave alone. And something else is being set up at the same time, taste. What a child is fed in those first months helps decide what will taste normal to them for the rest of their life. The idea that this window casts a long shadow is not new. It has a name in the literature, the developmental origins of health and disease. The underlying suggestion is that a developing body reads its environment and configures itself accordingly. Set up for scarcity, then delivered into abundance, and the settings may not match the world the body actually gets. It has been tested before, and by an even crueler accident. In the winter of 1944, the Netherlands starved. It followed the failure of the Allied offensive at Arnhem, a Dutch railway strike, and a German embargo on food transport. It lasted until the German surrender in May 1945. Children conceived during that famine were followed for decades afterwards. They showed measurably different health outcomes, in some cases into their 50s and 60s. The Dutch hunger winter is one of the reasons anyone thought to look at Britain's sugar at all. So, how do you study something that happened 70 years ago? You need a very large number of people, and you need to know exactly when each of them was born. And you need to know what happened to them since. Britain happens to have exactly that in the form of the UK Biobank. 500,000 volunteers, recruited between 2006 and 2010, aged 40 to 69 at the time. All of them consented to have their health followed for at least 30 years, which means a database built for the future turned out to be a way of looking backwards. It is a health database that has followed hundreds of thousands of participants for decades. It records, among many other things, who develops cancer and when. The researchers took more than 64,000 people born in Britain between 1951 and 1956. Those born earlier had spent more of their first 1,000 days under rationing. Those born later had spent progressively less. It is not a switch. It is a ramp, and a ramp is exactly what you want because it lets you look for a dose response. If sugar in infancy does nothing, the ramp should show nothing. It did not show nothing. People who spent longer under sugar rationing in their first 1,000 days had a lower incidence of 5 separate cancers: breast, prostate, liver, rectal, lung. The effect was strongest for liver cancer, where rates were around 69% lower. It was weakest for breast cancer, and weakest here still meant about 36% lower. Those are not small numbers. And here is the part that makes the timing so strange. These differences did not show up in childhood or in early adulthood. They only began to appear decades after the rationing had ended and after the two groups had spent their whole adult lives eating more or less the same way. The researchers also looked at biological aging, which is not the same thing as age. Two people can both be 70, while their cells and their immune systems are in visibly different condition. One way to measure that is telomere length. Telomeres are protective structures at the ends of chromosomes, and as cells divide and age, they generally get shorter. People who had spent longer under rationing had longer telomeres. On the researchers' own estimate, the difference works out at about 2.2 years of slower biological aging. They also found lower levels of a protein called granzyme B. Granzyme B rises when the immune system has been running hot for years, so a lower level points the same way, slower aging at the level of the cell. But the result the researchers themselves found most surprising was not the cancer and not the telomeres. It was the sugar. People who had been rationed as infants were still eating less sugar at around age 50. Not because anyone told them to, not because they remembered anything about it, they cannot possibly remember it. They also ate less overall, and their diets were healthier and more varied. 50 years after a policy ended, you could still see it on the plate. There appear to be two mechanisms running at once. One is biological. Early nutrition seems to shape how the metabolism, the organs, and the immune system develop. The other is behavioral, and in a way, it is the stranger of the two. A preference for less sweetness formed before you could speak appears to simply stay with you. Your palate was calibrated before you had any say in the matter. Now, the caveats, because they matter, and they are not small. This is not a randomized trial. Nobody was assigned to a group. A natural experiment is strong precisely because the thing that divided people, a date on a calendar, has nothing to do with their health. But the 1950s were changing in 100 other ways at the same time, and a good study has to work hard to rule those out. The health service was 4 years old. Housing was being rebuilt. Incomes were rising. Smoking was near its peak. Any of those could leave a mark on a birth cohort, and none of them stopped politely in September 1953. What makes the sugar boundary useful is that it is sharp, and that the date itself has no opinion about who was born on either side of it. This also is not an argument that rationing was good. It was not. It was scarcity, imposed by a war, and people were glad to see the back of it. And it is certainly not an argument that a child should never taste anything sweet. What it is evidence that a relatively small difference over a relatively short window can still be legible half a century later. And this is not the only study to use that same accident. Work using the same 1953 boundary has reported lower risks of type 2 diabetes and of high blood pressure. A recent study reported lower risks of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Another reported lower risks of heart disease and stroke. Different teams, different outcomes, The same September in 1953, which is the useful thing about an accident this clean, it can be asked more than one question. There is something genuinely unsettling in all this. A person born in 1952 has no memory whatsoever of the first 2 years of their life. Nobody does. That period is simply gone, as far as anyone is concerned. They did not choose what they were fed. They could not have objected. They were not consulted. And 7 years later, it appears to still be there, in their cells, in their risk, and in what they reach for in a shop. Children do not remember what they ate before they were 2. Their bodies, apparently, do.